Welcome to Real Talk, Real Estate Discussions with Andrew Kirsh. In each episode, Andrew interviews industry leaders. We'll hear their real-time opinions on today's market, their background and unique career highlights, and guidance for newcomers into the industry. You can find this show at scholarkirsh.com and on YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more. Now here's the host of Real Talk, Andrew Kirsh.
Episode 55 of Real Talk. Many of you have asked me, well, Andrew, how did your son do in your Little League playoffs? We had a great regular season, but much like the Dodgers in the last several years, we didn't perform in the playoffs. It's all good. They're 7, 8-year-olds. My son did make All-Stars, and so this month, every weekend, I'm in the Simi Valley area, Gura area, Encino, and just having the time of my life, reliving my childhood. As many of you know, I was a baseball player as well. This week, we have Grant Collard of Redstone Residential on. Grant has built up an amazing company focusing on student housing and market rate apartments. I think he's got about 50,000 beds, or he likes to say 50,000 leases throughout the country. And we have a great discussion on the state of student housing and that asset class and how it compares with traditional multifamily, the locations that they transact in, and the nuances of owning, operating, and at the same time providing third-party management. I hope you enjoy my discussion with Grant Collard. Hello, welcome to another edition of Real Talk. I'm here with Grant Collard, the CEO of Redstone Residential. Grant, how you doing today?
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me.
And so where do I find you today?
Today I'm at my home office in Springville, Utah. So just at the base of the mountains here. I think if I were to do this at my office in Provo, we would have an interruption about every 4 minutes. So a little quieter here.
Yeah, well, one of my favorite places in the world is the whole Park City, Deer Valley area. And I go there with my family every year for spring break. We were there this past spring break, and it's just a great part of the country.
It's amazing. We've had some good snow the last 2 years.
I know, and I understand it was snowing all the way through May. So yeah, hopefully you'll get some summer. So Grant, we can take this conversation in so many different ways. We've worked together for several years. You have a prolific third-party service business, and you also own, develop, and operate as well. So why don't you tell my audience, to the extent that they may not know Redstone, a little bit about the company?
Absolutely. So Redstone Residential, we started in 2009 as really a pure play student housing operator. So just third-party operations. I had come from a real estate private equity background. I was an analyst on the buy side, and there was an opportunity to step out. And I think what I realized is I really just liked entrepreneurship. I didn't really care what it was. And so there was an opportunity to buy a very small company that operated 3 student housing complexes. And we've grown that quite a bit. And coming out of the great financial crisis, student housing just did well. I think there was a realization that universities are generally stable. And in fact, during some type of a recession or a financial crisis, there's actually a tendency for students to go back to school. And so you typically will see enrollments rise during those periods. So we had a lot of luck, a lot of tailwinds, kind of right place, right time. But we picked up a lot of third-party assignments between 2009 and 2013. And around 2013, we started thinking, gosh, we're turning around a lot of these deals and clients are making a lot of money as we're able to kind of salvage some of these projects. And so we started purchasing our own projects around that time. But today we operate about 40,000 leases of student housing and conventional housing in 19 states. And we own about $1 billion worth of primarily student housing. I'd say we're at least 80% student housing. So our strategy has been to purchase student housing, mostly value add around the country, and then to develop conventional housing kind of in our backyard in Utah and Idaho.
What's the reaction of your clients when you do third-party management as to the fact that you own $1 billion of real estate, mostly student housing? Are they concerned that you could be a competitor to them, or is it a positive in that they know that when they have Redstone as their manager, they're going to treat the building like it's your own because you are also an owner?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It almost always comes up, and there's a handful of things where it's really worked out. I think we both know Mark Weinstein. He's a great guy down there in LA. We started that as a third-party relationship, and then we started doing joint ventures together. And so a lot of times our third-party clients actually become our partners later down the road as we kind of both discover, gosh, these are really fun people to work with. But in student housing, I think one of the things that bothers me about the market, and that's kind of silly, is you'll have these national student housing firms and they'll have maybe one project at all the Power 5 schools, right? So just really spread around the country, and they don't get really good at any certain market. And we've taken the opposite approach, where we say we're going to focus on a handful of markets where we might own or manage more than 50% of the student housing stock and have really deep knowledge. And what we see there is, for example, if you come in as a third-party client and say, hey, I'm a little bit concerned, you have a ton of other projects there, these projects end up helping each other. So for example, when one fills up for the fall, we might be able to start sending leads over to other properties. And so they're kind of a beneficiary of that. And then the last thing I would say is, I think when you own and you manage, there's some image that me or my partners on the ownership side are hiding in the bushes outside of a third-party property trying to steal tenants and send them to our property instead. And in reality, we don't have an A team and a B team at Redstone. Every single community manager and every single regional manager is highly incentivized and bonused and watching KPIs on having their properties perform. So it's the same system operating. In fact, some of my internal asset management team, actually, they complain the opposite direction. They say, guys, I feel like the third-party clients get more attention sometimes. And the reason is because I know that, Grant won't fire Redstone from off of our owned assets. And so I think it actually cuts the other way a little bit more because, we try and be our best and easiest clients. We haven't fired ourselves off of our own assets at this point. So there is a tendency to kind of really jump when the third-party clients have a concern.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. I mean, even in my world, I am a much better lawyer for my clients than I am for myself. And
Exactly.
I have my own investments and may do things a certain way for myself, but for others would always, like you said, jump when they ask how high. So, curious. In today's market, obviously, it's a choppy market across all asset classes. Specific, multifamily certainly has had and is facing a lot of headwinds, interest rates, and floating rate debt. How do you compare how traditional multifamily is faring today versus student housing?
Yeah, great question. It's really interesting. I feel like those two sectors rarely correlate. And so what I mean by that is right now I have a very, fairly large multifamily portfolio. We have a really good sized student housing portfolio. Almost everything on the students housing side is like killing it. I mean, it's really, really great fundamentals. I think our portfolio occupancy in the last academic school year got to about 99% across the country. And multifamily struggled. Multifamily, I think, is oversupplied right now in most markets. Maybe not some of the bigger gateway markets, but certainly kind of the boom markets. I'm thinking Salt Lake City, kind of my home market for multifamily, massively oversupplied. Austin, some serious issues there that we're working through. And student housing just didn't get to that same place. In fact, post-COVID or during COVID, I remember just the panic in the student housing sector. There was a lot of people that were like, student housing's over. This is going to accelerate the change to online only learning, and the sector will never recover. We just haven't seen that. But what we did see was a lot of development slowed down. And so the pipelines of student housing development pre-COVID have just never quite recovered, and the markets are quite tight. So we're going into our third year in a row of rental growth, in the 6 to 8% range in our portfolio. Some markets are higher, some markets are lower, but in general, it's really, really tight. So student housing transactions are down quite a bit, and it's tough to make new developments pencil. But I'd say we have mostly a capital markets issue rather than a fundamentals issue on the supply and the demand side.
What is traditionally the cap rate differential in student housing versus multifamily? And is that standard differential, is that what's in existence today?
Yeah, great question. Short answer, it's all over the place. I've watched it in the early 2010s. It wasn't uncommon to have more than 100 basis point differential with, student housing obviously being seen as more risky. Student housing really got hot, I would say, in 2017, 2018. It was really kind of the favorite food group. I feel like industrial has since supplanted that. But at that point, maybe in 2017, 2018, that differential, that gap was almost zero. I saw one report that showed it as 8 or 9 basis points. Today, I think you're looking at a 25 to 50 basis point adder. A lot of that's driven by debt. A lot of times the agencies will come in and say, okay, student pricing is this, conventional pricing is this. And so you're really just kind of solving for an IRR and a yield number.
So you're saying that the student housing cap rates will be about 25 basis points higher than traditional multifamily?
That's right.
Even though student housing has been a better performer than multifamily?
Yeah, I'd say in today's environment, it's probably a little bit better performer. We didn't get the massive rental run-ups in 2020 and 2021. I mean, we had sectors of our portfolio on the multifamily side that were getting, 20, 30%, increases on rent trade outs in those years. We never saw quite that level of frenzy or activity, but yeah, I think student housing is generally seen as more risky, generally seen as more operationally intensive. And I think, for a good reason. I watch a lot of entrants come into the space and think, hey, this is totally fine. We'll get it leased up. And then August comes around and they're, 20% vacant, 30% vacant. And then our phone starts to ring. Hey, can you fix this? And it's a tough thing. It's with student housing, the day that school starts, or maybe a week after school starts, internally, I kind of compare it to a cruise ship leaving the harbor. Like, ship has sailed, those beds are empty, and you're really not going to backfill those until the next year. So you get to kind of sit in that mess for 12 months if you don't do a good job on that lease up, or at least managing expectations and managing yield.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to get into the differences between owning and managing student housing versus traditional multifamily. Obviously, you have one shot to lease up your building. Once the school year starts, it's pretty much it's over. And then what about, if you could talk about, for those that may not understand or know about the student housing asset class, of just the wear and tear, the increased wear and tear on your units in student housing compared to multifamily, and how you get lease guarantees, I guess, from parents. Just talk about the differences in operating.
Yeah, great question. And this varies, I'd say, really widely between, different universities. There's, you would imagine if you have a party school, the wear and tear could be insane. I mean, it's almost like a down to the drywall, renovation every couple of years. And some of the stories that come out of what people do is just insane. Some of it's karma. I remember being a freshman at BYU and just this angsty teenager and just throwing a knife into my door, over and over again. And I think every time somebody does something insane in our portfolio, I think back to that. I'm like, hey, it's okay. You were that guy. They'll pay the fine and move on. But yeah, like generally student housing is furnished, and so furniture is like a huge wear item. You walk into a lot of these apartments and you'll see people, put the sofas up on the kitchen table and make stadium seating in their front room, to watch movies with. It's just people get creative and people party, so there's a lot more wear and tear. I think the biggest thing is, people are leasing a bed space, right? Whether that be a shared bedroom or whether that be a private bedroom, they're leasing a bed space. And so they're jointly responsible for the condition of the apartment, but they're individually responsible for their lease obligation. So that can be fun occasionally. You have a move out inspection and everyone's pointing at the roommate and said, no, I didn't do that. I didn't touch that. That was, that was Dave over here. He's the party animal. So that can be a little bit fun. And then, students by nature don't have credit, right? And so it's very, very tough sometimes. And you see huge differences in collections across different universities. If it's a tier 1 university, generally these students are very, very serious about their studies. They're going to pay their rent on time. They're going to treat the property well. If it's a tier 3 school, maybe they're unsure. Maybe mom and dad kind of pushed them out of the house and said, hey, take a couple classes here. It can be a totally different situation. So generally we require guarantors. Parents sign as those guarantors. We run credit on them. More and more in the last couple of years, though, we've seen products that are kind of like a bond, right? It's like, hey, if you can't have a guarantor, just pay a couple $100, and this third-party company will effectively be your guarantor for a fee.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I know we did a transaction together at BYU, and I was blown away when I learned that it's a violation of the BYU honor code if the student does not pay his or her rent. I mean, that would make the ability of rent collections almost guaranteed at that point.
That's right. And that's why I said we generally use guarantors. At some schools, it's not necessary, particularly if it's a private school or a religious school that has some type of honor code that requires, fulfillment of obligations and contracts. And so we had almost, really no delinquency losses at BYU when they had that system in place. Now they've since removed it, and it's basically just kind of at market.
So they have, okay.
We brought those guarantees back in, but it is helpful. I'd say that that system at BYU helped people, fulfill their lease obligations and made for almost no losses in that market.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the early days of Redstone. On your website, you talk about, 3 of you managing 600 beds, and now what's the number? I mean, you're at tens of thousands of beds that you guys manage, and also traditional apartment buildings.
Yeah, we've grown quite a bit from about 600 leases. It's kind of funny. You either count beds or units, and I kind of now mash them all together and call them leases, which is maybe a little bit silly. People ask us, how many units do you have? And I say, I have no idea. It's kind of counting leases here. But I started out in college. I was an intern with a real estate private equity firm and really enjoyed that experience. Kind of really opened my eyes to multifamily. And this was in 2007. And in 2007, the world was kind of ending in terms of real estate. The next fall, I remember 2000 and fall of 2007, I remember sitting in economics classes and having my professors just say, we don't know what's going to happen. We've never seen this type of thing. And I took a job in Texas that I really didn't like because I was, my concern was that real estate was gone and it would be gone forever. And that was really a huge mistake. I lasted about 6 months in that environment. And then I said, okay, I can't ever work for anybody again. And we got Redstone going in 2009. Had the opportunity to buy a really small property management firm for $50,000. And, at the time, it was just a route to entrepreneurship. A lot of my friends that I had gone to school with in 2009 were baristas at Starbucks. I mean, it was just a blessing to have any kind of a job. And so I thought, okay, if we can at least have a going concern on the property management side, then we can layer in the investment business. And, those were humble times. We actually operated out of a single wide construction trailer for a while. My wife and I and our newborn son lived in a duplex next door. And, it's funny, we didn't realize how bad it was until years later. Now we kind of laugh about it, kind of joke about it. My newborn son was like Harry Potter in like a little closet. But, it really picked up from there. I think we were so deep in the weeds that we didn't understand it at the time. We self-implemented Yardi in 2009. We really got to understand at a core and at a deep level how management worked. And sometimes I'll get asked, people will say, well, do you regret kind of that operating experience? Shouldn't you have just stayed kind of on the real estate private equity side, buying, apartment communities? And I think what's really set us apart over the years is like we just have a deep understanding of both the management and the investment side of the business. And we're able to step in and analyze a situation very, very quickly and just understand, hey, we've operated on site. I've been the guy with the pressure washer, on the weekend trying to, make this building look better. And so we understand very, very quickly how to resolve a lot of common issues and underwrite deals quickly.
And so what would you say was the inflection point when you realized, wow, this is something that is going to take off. We've made it one of the preeminent third-party operators of student housing. What was there a deal? Was there something where you said to your partners, "All right, we're good. We're going to make it," or do you still wonder?
I hope that moment's still in front of us. I like to think our best days are ahead. Great question. We had a few moments in our history where I was like, this is the best. We made it. We can just phone it in. And I feel like every time I say that in my mind, then the market changes or something really bad happens. And so we try and avoid, jinxing it. But yeah, 2013 was a really breakout year for us. It was the year that we broke out of our home market in Utah. We took on just thousands and thousands of beds of new property management assignments from out-of-state groups. And that was the moment where we kind of said, okay, we're the dominant force in region for student housing. And that was really kind of exhilarating. At the same time, that was really the year we started going to the conferences and getting involved nationally. We really had no concept that there were others out there doing this. In 2009, the largest players in the student housing industry were, 5 or 10% of the size that they are now. And so, we just really thought we were these misfits out there, operating apartments as buy the lease student housing. In the consolidation and the institutionalization of the space had not yet occurred. 2017 and 2018 was another kind of breakout year. I think we went from 15,000 beds up to maybe 25, 28,000. And that was just really kind of the heyday of lots and lots and lots of student housing acquisitions. Lots of institutional groups and other groups entered the space and said, hey, we need somebody to show us the ropes. We don't have operating experience. And then 2021 obviously was a great year for everybody. I mean, I just remember the end of 2021, I think we acquired maybe $400 million in deals, which is a lot for us. We're all high net worth and small family office syndications, but we just sat back at the end of 2021 and we were like, man, we're just such geniuses. Like, I can't believe how awesome we are. And then, very quickly the market turned and humbled us. But those are kind of the inflection points that we saw. Some of them earned, some of them just tailwinds and being in the right place.
Yeah. And so as CEO, where do you spend most of your time?
Ooh, that's a great question. I would say it depends. Since the rate tightening, I have spent a ton of time in operations, and that's not uncommon right now. Transactions are down significantly. We've only purchased 3 deals in the last 2 years. 2 of those were heavy value add deals in the Midwest, north of 7% cap rates, and then one of them was in our backyard here in Utah. But I've spent probably 70% of my time in operations on the management company, really just kind of turning over every stone and saying, how do we make the best of a tough environment, and really kind of sharpen our skills, sharpen our processes, so that we're ready for the next real estate cycle. When it booms again, I think we're going to be a completely transformed company. It's going to be exciting.
Yeah. And then on the ownership side, how do you capitalize your deals from an equity perspective? Is it through syndications, for friends and family? Is it through institutional joint venture relationships, fund model? Can you tell our audience?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, it's kind of funny. A lot of people, when we took out our first deal, I remember just being absolutely terrified. I think I had, $100,000 of earnest money down, which was a ton of money at the time. I remember looking at my wife and saying, like, hey, if I screw this up, you can let me have it. But we just shot out our OM to basically everybody that we knew, and it was oversubscribed with, I think we had 7 or 10 investors in our first deal. It was oversubscribed in about 3 days. And those early successes, we did really well with those first acquisitions. And so those people told their friends and their friends and their friends. And so we have about 500 active investors, high net worth, very small family offices. I'd say our average check size is probably about $200,000, $250,000. Lots of pros and cons with how we capitalize our deals. It provides a ton of flexibility for us. I really enjoy working with those investors. Again, they're my friends and my family, or at least they started out that way, and now they've kind of referred to their friends and family.
Well, I thought you were going to say they started out as friends and family, and then because of a few investments, they're no longer friends and they're no longer family. I'm just kidding. I know you have a very...
Yeah, it actually is kind of funny. Sometimes I'll be at a party and someone will walk up and be like, hey, how's pre-lease going? I'm like, crap, I forgot you were in that deal.
Well, that's when I invest with a lot of my clients. And so I like to always, usually I'm the receiving end of, where's this document? When are you going to get me that out? And then when I see, or I'll turn the table and I'll say, okay, where's my K1 and when am I getting the quarterly reports?
That's right. Yeah, you got to take advantage of that. Really grill them. I've done that a few times with some of our clients. Where I've invested in their fund or I've invested in their project. I'm like, okay, I like sitting on this side of the table. We started off. I worded that a little bit awkwardly, but started off friends and family, and they've referred out to more and more people. Lots of advantages to that. It's very friendly and very, very flexible capital. Some of the kind of formative experiences that I had were on some of our early deals, both development and acquisition. We would sell them. We'd flip them after 2 or 3 years, and they'd get their money back. Maybe a great multiple, 3, 4x, something like that. And it kind of struck me funny. A lot of our investors were not happy with that. They say, well, hold on for a second. We gave you money, and what we actually wanted was a check for the next 20 years. And you just gave us our money back. So now we have a tax problem. And now we have a redeployment problem. And my response was, well, hey, we had an awesome IRR. And a lot of these investors were like, I don't know what that is, and I don't care. Like, what they were looking for was something that they could have long-term ownership in. They wanted great real estate that would yield for, a decade or more. And so we kind of flipped our model and said, okay, let's not go purely on an IRR basis. Let's go on more of a cash flow basis. And that's how most of our syndications are set up at this point. Now, the downsides of it are it can be tough to raise that type of money. So I'd say we're solidly a mid-market player. We buy deals in the 20 to, let's call it, $60 million range. And to do deals larger than that, typically we bring on a partner. We talked about Mark Weinstein at MJW Investments. He's come in with us, and sometimes we just kind of split the baby and say, hey, let's each do half of this deal. So we are looking into institutional options. We've third-party managed for a lot of those institutional players for a long time, and in looking at possibly taking on some JVs in order to do larger deals. The downside of that, in my mind, is shorter turnarounds. When we find really, really great real estate that we have high conviction in, that we want to put a lot of our own money in, that's real estate that sometimes is truly irreplaceable. On the student housing side, if you find that prime A location that touches campus or shares a property line with campus, you actually may not be able to replace that. With conventional apartments, maybe it's a great location, downtown or relative to employers, but usually you're not talking down to the block in terms of what is the A+ location versus the B location. And so our preference is to really go long and to have investors that want to own for 10 or 20 years with the assets that prove to be really good ones. So we're kind of in that flux right now. We have about $1 billion in assets under management, and a lot of people are kind of, wow, how did you put that together without institutional money? And the answer is we just didn't know any better. So we may pivot to institutional or a fund at some point, but I'd say the high net worth capital served us really well, and it kind of aligns with our interests as well.
I speak about this a lot on the podcast with clients. I believe that private capital, friends and family money, if you have that network and you have the internal infrastructure to deal with hundreds of investors or thousands of investors even, and delivering the K1s and the K1s and the quarterly reports, etc., and don't mind the phone call from a $100,000 investor as to what's going on, that's always the cheaper form of capital, and you get to control other decisions. Not that there's anything wrong with the joint venture world. Most of my deals are probably joint venture deals, but someone else is going to make the decisions for you, when to sell, refinancing, going over budget or not, and your weekly calls, status calls with them, and you've got some analyst who's 23 years old who is making your life a living hell, but you're dealing with one investor and they wrote a check of 90 to 95% of the capital, so they're entitled to all of that. There's not one that's better or worse, they're just different.
I think you're right. As we've been contemplating this, I think there's some irony in starting a business. I started a business, and my main value behind starting it was freedom. I thought, gosh, I don't want to be working for the man. I don't want someone where I'm just under their thumb. And the irony is that sometimes as a business owner, now I don't have one boss, I have hundreds or even thousands of bosses. And so you're kind of trying to optimize for what does freedom look like for you. In our business, we do third-party management, so we're not. We do the weekly calls, we do the weekly reports. We have the situations where we really don't have a whole lot of decision-making control on stuff larger than the day-to-day. The investment side, we went the opposite direction. We have hundreds of investors, and I'd say to your point of how difficult it is to manage, I don't really buy into that. I think that using whatever it is, Juniper Square or IMS, it's so automated, and you're able to really distribute all those types of things. I probably get 5 emails back after we send out reports and distributions per quarter out of the 500, and most of them just say, "Great job, thanks, appreciate you." We've largely gone with people that trust us to do our job. They see us as the experts in the space, and we go out and try and make us all some money.
Yeah. Well, look, Grant, you've been so generous with your time, and I just want to thank you for coming on to the show. I know you are one of the best in class when it comes to student housing and multifamily in general. I know a lot of our clients really, and myself, enjoy working with you. So just thank you for all that. Thank you for coming on to the show, and best of success and luck to Redstone Residential. And next time we talk, I'm sure the number of leases will be now 100,000 a year.
Let's hope. Well, thanks so much for having me. And again, been super impressed with you and your firm. I can't tell you how many times we send off something and say, "Hey, could you review this?" And it's turned within 12 or 18 hours, which is just unheard of. So I really appreciate kind of the focus that your firm puts into working on our deals.
No, I appreciate that. All right, Grant, thank you. Take care.
Sure. Thanks.
You've been listening to Real Talk, Real Estate Discussions with Andrew Kirsh. You can catch prior episodes at scholarkirsh.com and on YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, and for sharing the show with others.